It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Apple Card is designed to help you pay less interest. Unlike other cards, it estimates how much interest you'll owe and suggests moves to help you pay off your balance faster. Also, you can keep more of your money. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval. Interest estimates on the payment wheel are illustrative only and may not fully reflect actual interest charges on your account. Estimates are based on your posted account balance at the time of the estimate and do not include pending transactions or any other purchases you may make before the end of the billing period. It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Apple Card is designed to help you pay less interest. Unlike other cards, it estimates how much interest you'll owe and suggests moves to help you pay off your balance faster. Also, you can keep more of your money. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval. Interest estimates on the payment wheel are illustrative only and may not fully reflect actual interest charges on your account. Estimates are based on your posted account balance at the time of the estimate and do not include pending transactions or any other purchases you may make before the end of the billing period.
The following podcast includes explicit language, including, well, you'll just have to wait and see.
Hi, I'm Josh Levin, Slate's national editor, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of January 23rd, 2023. On this week's show, we'll assess the divisional round of the NFL playoffs, where the Chiefs, Bengals, Eagles, and 49ers emerged victorious. We'll also discuss Tony Dungy's history of anti-gay rhetoric and whether NBC and the NFL should do something about it. And finally, Slate contributor Isaac Butler will be here to talk about the rise of the American men at the Australian Open and review Netflix's new tennis reality series, Breakpoint. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm the author of The Queen and the host of the podcast 1 Year. Stefan Fatsis is also in D.C., and he's the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside, and he's recovering from being obliterated by his own child in a Scrabble live stream. Hello, Stefan.
I wasn't obliterated. The final score was 457 to 438, but it was the first time that we played each other in a tournament on live stream, and I am just grateful that I did not completely fuck up and embarrass myself. But she was the superior player in the game. She threw down two crazy bingos. One was Sinology, Sinology, and the other was Pratique, Pratique. I managed to hang in there and make it close, and the game did go down to the last play. We'll post a link to the live stream. You can watch it.
This wasn't an upset. I mean, she's been better than you for a while
Yeah,
now,
this
right?
was not an upset.
It's sort of like the Eagles versus the Giants, like just pretty much a predicted result, right?
Yeah, I mean, Scrabble games are pretty random sometimes, but no, she is a far better player than I am now because she has spent the last 2.5 years studying words every day. She's kind of crazy good now, I got to say. So we played in this. This was at a tournament in New Orleans. Thank you for the restaurant recommendations, Josh. She finished 5th out of 36 players in the top division, 12-7-1, and I finished 11-9 in 13th place and got some cash too because I had the best record of the players in the bottom half of the field, the players with the lowest ratings in the tournament. So it was a good time. It was fun to play her on live stream. Really proud of her.
Participation check.
Participation check, dude. Yeah. I'll take my $270.
With us from California and already making his presence felt, Joel Anderson, host of Slow Burn Seasons 3 and 6. Hello, Joel.
Hey, since you all want to talk so much about TCU athletics, do we want to talk about possibly the biggest win in TCU men's basketball history over the weekend, or are we only talk about TCU when they're getting humiliated on the national stage?
Man, you're putting that on us? Who'd they beat? Tell us.
No, well, I mean, okay, over the weekend, sorry, Derek John, our boy Derek, who's a KU fan. TCU beat number 2 ranked Kansas 83-60 at Allen Fieldhouse on Saturday. I was talking with some TCU fans this weekend. That probably is the biggest, at least regular season victory in TCU basketball history. So shout out those Horned Frogs showing up big cleaning up our brand a little bit after, which was not a great week for TCU athletics. If you've been following, you may know what I'm talking about. If not, I'm not going to talk about it in public.
I don't want to piss on your Texas party, Joel, but also over the weekend, Philadelphia's own Temple Owls beat the number 1 ranked team in the country, Houston, 56-55.
I mean, that's, look, man, good for Temple, any given Saturday, but we'll see them in the tournament.
I learned from Hang Up and Listen last week that nobody really follows men's college basketball anymore. So I'm glad that, you guys are still deriving some trolling and bragging rights out of it. In our Slate Plus segment this week, we will talk about the short tenure. I guess it wasn't even a tenure of Ed Reed at Bethune-Cookman. We'll discuss what went down there and how Deion Sanders rose to his defense, maybe unsurprisingly. To listen to that, you need to be a Slate Plus member. You get bonus segments on this and other Slate shows. You get ad-free shows, and you also get to support us. Thank you. Slate.com/hangupplus. That's slate.com/hangupplus.
As a 2-minute warning in the first half of the Buffalo Bills' divisional round playoff game against Cincinnati, the image of Damar Hamlin appeared on screens at Highmark Stadium. Hamlin, of course, is the Bills safety who went into cardiac arrest during the Bills game against the Bengals on January 4th. Hamlin has had a rapid recovery and, according to Bills coach Sean McDermott, been at the team facility almost daily. And now, here he was with family at a Bills game for the first time since his terrifying collapse. On the screen, Hamlin held up his hands in the shape of a heart, which now become his signature gesture, and tried to hype up the crowd.
This is it right here. What a scene. Oh. That's his sign. What a beautiful, triumphant story that galvanized this entire nation.
Yeah, but this is no storybook, no fairy tale. The Bills may have been inspired by Hamlin's dramatic return, but they couldn't do anything to celebrate it. 4 plays later, the Bengals kicked a 28-yard field goal to extend their lead to 17-7 in a game they controlled from start to finish. Cincinnati went on to win 27-10, clinching its second straight matchup against Kansas City in the AFC Championship. In the NFC, the San Francisco 49ers advanced to the conference championship game for the second year in a row after beating the Dallas Cowboys 19-12. The 49ers will host the Philadelphia Eagles, who routed the New York Giants 38-7 in their divisional round playoff game Saturday. So, Josh, look, a lot of people seem to be rooting for Hamlin and the Bills and hoping that they would be inspired to keep the season going. Obviously, that didn't happen. What did you make of the game?
It was really dominated by the Cincinnati Lions on both sides of the ball. And I think we all understand that in this modern age of football, passing matters more than running. But there was something, I don't know if it's vestigial, Joel, but there is just something about seeing one team being able to run the ball for what felt like 10 yards a pop and the other team not being able to run at all that just still feeds my lizard brain sense of football dominance, especially when the game is in the snow, as it was in Buffalo. And look, we know that Josh Allen is one of the best quarterbacks in football, that he's capable of absolutely astounding things in the playoffs as well as in the regular season. And so I'm not going to say that Joe Burrow is necessarily better, that he'll have a better record or career over the next 10 or 15 years. But that guy, Joe Burrow, man, especially with the receivers that he has, particularly Jamar Chase, they look really hard to stop. And they have the sort of cliched and probably undeserved chip on their shoulder of nobody believing in them or respecting them, Stefan. And they're going to have a chance to take on the Chiefs again. They've beaten the Chiefs 3 games in a row by a field goal apiece. And that will be a fun game to watch. It'll be a lot more fun if Patrick Mahomes can actually move. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, before we move on to that and the Chiefs, I think there are 2 things that are worth mentioning about the Bills. One is that, Josh Allen might have been hurt. We just don't know. He injured his elbow earlier in the season in week 9, back in November, a UCL injury when he was hit as he was throwing. And during this game, he also had an ankle injury in December. In this game, he went into the injury tent after taking a hit. He was replaced by Case Keenum for one play. That was not determinative of this game because, as you said, Josh, Cincinnati just dominated on the line, particularly even without three of their starting offensive linemen. But that could have played a role. We just don't know. This did not feel like the high-powered Bills that we were used to seeing. And the second factor here is Damar Hamlin. I think it's easy to underestimate what the Bills went through to turn it into a sort of, dramatic narrative and tell ourselves that they wanted to win it for Damar. But life's way more complicated than that. What they went through a few weeks ago is unfathomable to fans. And as SI's Connor Orr wrote on Twitter, and I think he said this well, I just think we need to give this team a little grace. Less than a month ago, they were having interventions with mental health professionals. Josh Allen said some guys couldn't sleep at night. They dealt with the very edge of the sport's most dangerous reality. That had to have played a role here.
Yeah, this is going to be one of the meanest things I've probably ever said on this podcast, but I wanted the Bengals to win for exactly that reason. I wanted them to strip all poetic or metaphorical meaning from Damar Hamlin's injury. Like, I didn't want him or that moment to be exploited any further. And so, if the Bills had won, and they have won since Damar Hamlin's been hurt. Like, it's like obviously not at first, they've been through something that nobody else has been able to go through, and it inspired them. But then in this game, all of a sudden, it hurt them.
This was the same dudes they were playing when Damar Hamlin collapsed.
Yeah. If the Bills had won with Hamlin in the stadium, it's easy how they would have spun the story forward. Buffalo is a team of destiny, fueled by a desire to win for their fallen comrade. But when they lost, it was just a football game that Cincinnati won in dominating fashion. And I just remember when we talked about this a couple weeks ago, when Nyheim Hines returned 2 kickoffs for a touchdown to help the Bills clinch home field advantage, and everyone thought it was a magical piece of punctuation to that week of coverage. And back then I said on this show, I didn't understand the connection, but I definitely understood what it might have meant if the Bills had won. And I just didn't want that sort of spin. I didn't want Damar to serve as like a necessary sacrifice for the greater good of the Bills or football. And at the least, the NFL and certain fans and writers won't be able to deploy him or his injury in that way. So to me, in that way, it was a small sort of victory. And I know this is very petty, but it's so when Damar Hamlin shows up on the screen and the Bengals are in scoring position, and right after Damar Hamlin appears on screen, the Bengals got a false start on 3rd and goal. And that was the first penalty of the game. And then Burrow throws this laser to Jamar Chase in the back of the end zone, and that touchdown doesn't count. And I'm like, oh, shit, man, maybe there is something to this. But no, the Bengals eventually put them away. And I'm sort of grateful for that because I think the story is dramatic and sad on its own. It didn't need the added bonus of this other stuff that that the Bills are getting gassed on part of that. And I'm sorry, Josh. I know that maybe that's a horrifying thing to say out loud, but maybe you'll appreciate it because I was siding with your LSU boys. You kept bringing up, Burrow, he's and then Jamar Chase. You didn't mention Tyler Boyd or T. Higgins or Joe Mixon, who was peeling off run after run in that snow. You had to mention Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, which understandable.
I know from our relationship offline that you don't actually like Joe Mixon, so I'm discounting most of what you said. But no, I think that was really smart and well said, Joel. And you have me persuaded. But based on what you said, Stefan, clearly it's correct that things are a lot more complicated than how they're portrayed vis-a-vis how teams respond. All of that was well said too. But I also think that there's something extremely mundane but true about the Damar Hamlin fallout, which is, and I apologize again for saying this, but the reason that Damar Hamlin was playing, he was a backup. Their starting safety, Micah Hyde, was out for the year because of a neck injury. And then Damar Hamlin went out. They had another backup in. Then they lost a bunch more secondary guys in this game due to injuries that were not at all uplifting, did not have any potential to be heartwarming.
2 defensive backs collided and both were treated for head injuries and came out of the game, did not return.
They ran out of players. I mean, the Bengals had guys missing on the offensive line, as was said earlier in the segment. I mean, a thing that is true in the NFL, and that's so obvious that it's often not worth saying, is just that it's a game of attrition, and they play the playoffs at the end of an increasingly long regular season, and it's just about who is left standing. And, Joel, Tony Pollard for the Cowboys breaks his leg, and they're left with Ezekiel Elliott, who kind of defines below replacement level for running back at this point because of an accumulation of injuries over his career. And so that game, I think, really turned in that moment. And then the 49ers are led by their third string quarterback. So it's just a question of, again, not in any kind of poetic or deeply meaningful way, but like who can transcend the absolute carnage of a football season to win these games.
And the Chiefs nearly weren't able to do that. Patrick Mahomes had his ankle rolled and was limping the entire game, came out for a bit, and Chad Henne led a 98-yard touchdown drive in his absence. Who knows what condition Mahomes will be in later. The injury occurred in the second quarter, and Chris Collinsworth said at the start of the second half that we just don't know what happened or what the Chiefs did to allow Patrick Mahomes to continue to play. He said they probably took an X-ray. He didn't mention the likeliest treatment, which was that he got a shot of Toradol or something to allow him to at least be mobile enough to stand in the pocket and throw often off of one leg.
Right. And look, in a 3 preseason, 17-game season, it doesn't just matter who you play, it's when you play them. And just like the Bengals caught the Bills later in the season when they've been more uneven, and we're talking about injuries. The Bills, people forget, Von Miller, their big offseason acquisition, has been out with a knee injury for a long time, right? And so the Bengals, again, they're going to catch the Chiefs at their most vulnerable because Pat Mahomes got hurt. And that's just football, man. Unfortunately, if you play long enough, these guys are going to get hurt, and then you're going to have to deal with it. When I think about the Cowboys 49ers game, the Tony Pollard injury does stand out a little bit, but I think of it this way. The Cowboys are a very good team with a pretty good quarterback that lost on the road to a superior team. It happened the way a season's worth of results suggested that it might. Dak Prescott, who led the league in interceptions, threw 2 interceptions. The league's best defense shut down the Cowboys, and the San Francisco 49ers' methodical, competent offense ground them down. They didn't do anything especially dynamic, but they did enough. And so sometimes one-game samples tell you nothing, right? I'm always on that. Like I would like to believe that 65-7 is an anomaly. That doesn't tell you much about those two teams. Georgia is better.
You brought it up yourself.
I'm just saying.
How dare you guys keep bringing this up?
No, well, I'm just saying. I'm just trying to remind people. Look, I'm a Houston Oilers fan. They lost to the Bengals 61-7 once. So I was reminded. I was like, oh yeah, I've actually been on the end of it ass kicking like this before. But sometimes one-game samples tell you nothing, but sometimes they're a reflection of the larger sample. And I think that's kind of what we saw all throughout the playoffs,
weekend,
right? Yeah, all weekend.
Yeah, the Eagles are really good. We haven't mentioned them. We also haven't talked about Brett Maher.
I was so shocked that he made those field goals.
Yes.
Just absolutely.
Me too. Absolutely.
And watching with like my hands covering my eyes to see what would happen. And I don't know, Stefan, do you commend Mike McCarthy for continuing to send him out there and potentially subject? If he had missed, it seemed like when they sent him out for that short field goal, I think what was it? Like under 30 yards or something like that. It seemed to me like if he missed that, his career was over. Like that was what the stakes were in that moment. And it's funny that to me, obviously a neutral observer, I don't care in particular who won that game. Like that to me seemed like the biggest stakes of that game rather than like, is this going to go in or are the 49ers or Cowboys going to win the game?
You mean like this guy's career and mental health? Yeah.
That's what I definitely cared about the most in that game.
Yeah, background, he missed 4 extra points the previous round of the playoffs. Someone pointed out on Twitter that Maher has missed more extra points in his last 3 games than Justin Tucker has missed in his 189-game NFL career. But he also had made his last 11 field goals, and then he made 2 more. I commend Mike McCarthy for sending him back out there, and I believe that Brett Maher, like most kickers, understands that this is a mechanical process, and if I go through the mechanics correctly, I'm going to be okay, and the last kick should not matter. At some point, the last kick does matter, and the blocked extra point in the 49ers game did not look like it would have gone through had it not been blocked.
Yeah, Greg Olson did a really good job explaining. Like, I actually think that the fact that it got blocked was probably good for his mental health, because if it had cleared the line, it would have missed by so much.
It looked like it might have. He completely pulled the kick. But these are athletes who are extraordinarily good at what they do. I mean, I thought that McCarthy should have taken a chance and sent him out for a 58-yard field goal at one point when that was a possibility, instead of going for it on 4th down. Later on that drive, they converted, and then Prescott threw an interception. This is a guy that's the only kicker in NFL history who's attempted a field goal of longer than 60 yards and never missed one. It's not like Brett Maher's a bad player. He's one of the best players in one of the most, refined skills in professional sports.
Yeah, and Rick Ankiel was one of the best pitchers in baseball until he couldn't find the plate.
Right. I mean, did he have the yips? A lot of people were saying yips, yips, yips. We have no evidence of that. I mean, he missed a bunch of kicks in a row, and he was clearly psyched out, and his routine was thrown off. I'm glad he made those last 2 field goals. I never root for kickers to miss, but in this case, God, it was excruciating. And as a lot of people also noted, if Dallas had, on the last potential game-tying drive of the game, they were down 7, right? They had the ball. They go down the field and scored a touchdown. Oh my God!
I was scared. I was so scared for him. I was like, oh God, don't put him in that situation. That's not fair.
Or put him in the situation and let him succeed. That's what these guys get paid.
My last question for y'all: did any of the weekend appeal to your '90s sensibilities, like the home playoff game between the Cowboys and the 49ers, the splashy Sunday, Bay Area weather, and the Cowboys and 49ers playing it out, or the snowy home playoff game in Buffalo? Because it just made me feel like a kid a little bit. Yeah, didn't it? It just felt really warm and cozy in a way. I don't know. It just made me feel like a kid again to see those guys all playing in these spots.
That was cool. Yeah. And Bengals Chiefs is going to be a fascinating game, and Eagles 49ers could be, I think, a train wreck on multiple levels. We'll have to see how Brock Purdy holds up. But I just want to make one final note about injuries. Like, there's been a lot of appropriate attention on the NBA and star players missing the amount of games that they miss during the regular season, and sometimes in the playoffs too. And I think one of the 5,000 factors to explain why the NFL is a dominant cultural force is that the best players could be missing. Huge numbers of players that are important to their teams could be missing, and nobody cares. It is something structural about the sport. The stars are more important to team success in the NBA than they are in the NFL. But I think it also has to do with kind of our expectation as viewers. We just don't expect for the best NFL players to necessarily be there, and we don't care. We watch anyway.
In the next segment, what, if anything, should NBC and the NFL do about Tony Dungy?
It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Apple Card is designed to help you pay less interest. Unlike other cards, it estimates how much interest you'll owe and suggests moves to help you pay off your balance faster. Also, you can keep more of your money. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval. Interest estimates on the payment wheel are illustrative only and may not fully reflect actual interest charges on your account. Estimates are based on your posted account balance at the time of the estimate and do not include pending transactions or any other purchases you may make before the end of the billing period. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $700 on average. And auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the more than 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $698 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
2 weeks ago, Sid Ziegler of Outsports published a 2-part series about Tony Dungy's history of anti-gay statements, calling the Hall of Fame player and coach and NBC sports analyst probably the most publicly anti-LGBT person in NFL history. Dungy had no comment about any of that, but last Wednesday, responding to a tweet from the right-wing Daily Wire, he repeated to his nearly 1 million followers the anti-trans lie that schools are providing litter boxes for children who identify as cats. On Thursday, he said he was sorry because, quote, as a Christian, I should speak in love and in ways that are caring and helpful, end quote. Then on Friday, Dungy spoke at the annual anti-abortion March for Life rally in D.C., where he said that Damar Hamlin surviving an on-field heart attack was God using football, quote, to shine some light on the subject of life for all of us, end quote.
You know, an unbelievable thing happened that night, a professional football game with millions of dollars of ticket money and advertising money on the line. That game was canceled. Why? Because a life was at stake. And people wanted to see that life saved. Even people who aren't necessarily religious got together and called on God. Well, that should be encouraging to us because that's exactly why we're here today. Because every day in this country, innocent lives are at stake. And the only difference is they don't belong to a famous athlete and they're not seen on national TV.
Joel, neither the NFL nor NBC has said anything about Dungy's views or statements. And on Saturday, he was on the field at the Chiefs-Jaguars game in Kansas City in his usual role as a network analyst. What do you make of all this?
I guess my first observation, having heard that clip, because I didn't hear the speech in full, is that, Tony, those people hate you and everything else you represent. I would hope you would know that by now as a black man in America, but obviously you don't. But for that, those people hate you. But on the whole, my broader thought is that it seems fairly par for the course. The game itself, the broadcast itself, Football Night in America are extremely conservative in a league that seemingly prioritizes its conservative fan base above all else. Like, you don't call what Tony Dungy is on Football Night in America if you're not trying to say something about what your product is and what you're trying to represent. Just the whole production itself, the national anthem, the military flyovers, tremendous police presence, stadium itself, a country music intro. Like, of course I'm not surprised the NBC has said nothing. Why? Because they've always sort of thrown rocks and hidden their hands in that regard. Look, when NBC hired Tony Dungy in 2009, it was pretty clear who he was. Like 2 years prior, he had accepted the, quote, Friend of Family Award from the conservative Indiana Family Institute and told the audience there that he supported the group's efforts to amend the Indiana Constitution to define marriages between 1 man and 1 woman. At the time, the Colts didn't comment, and the NFL said Dungy is speaking for himself and expressing his views, which he isn't fully entitled to do. So 2 years later, he gets into that job, one of the highest profile jobs there is in professional football. Like, that is the NFL's premier product, Football Night in America, Sunday evening. And they hired him to be an analyst in that position. So I assume the NFL and the NBC would not have allowed him to be in that position if they had known or cared about the context of those particular comments. And also, like, we're not talking about Charles Barkley or even Shannon Sharpe. Like, we're talking about a fairly milquetoast former NFL coach who's never said anything that I can remember as being interesting or notable. It's not like if they got rid of Tony Dungy, I think there would be any hit to the ratings or anything. So they want him there, and they're defending him. So in the end, that's maybe the most interesting thing. You got a person wading into what we tend to call the culture war without fear of reprisal. And it's not like he couldn't be easily replaced by someone else. Dungy represents something to the NBC and the NFL. They clearly like it or don't have a problem with it. And that's what I think of more than anything that they say about Pride or Spirit Days that the NFL has.
So when Dungy got that award and said what he said about gay marriage in 2007, Barack Obama had not come out publicly in favor of gay marriage. Quite the opposite, in fact. And so it seems a little bit ahistorical to me to say that NBC was making like a big choice or decision in hiring him in 2009. At that point, there was no sanction for anyone in public life for having the views that he had. Or you disagree?
I think that, like, this is just, maybe some people will consider the distinction without difference. It's one thing to say, I don't support the marriage. It's another to say, I'm actually against it. You know what I mean? Like, and that,
totally.
And I think that's a substantive difference, but
it's a substantive difference, but I feel like it was one that was kind of elided at the time. And it just doesn't seem like it was anything that, as a corporation, NBC would have thought twice about or thought that they would come in for like a huge amount of scrutiny for. I think maybe I'm wrong. It's definitely has a different valence to say what he said then versus now.
But it wasn't the last time he said things like that.
Yeah, and as Sid Sigler noted in one of his pieces, and I'm quoting from it, the Cincinnati Reds fired longtime broadcaster Tom Brenneman for a flippant anti-gay slur caught on a hot mic. Curt Schilling was quickly fired by ESPN after the World Series champion posted an unflattering image of someone he called transgender and publicly spoke out against trans people. And he also mentions Craig James, who was fired by Fox Sports for speaking out against same-sex marriage years ago. And so the thing that I find interesting about this is that Dungy is the opposite of crude. He says anti-gay things in the most polite and refined and polished way possible. And it's not just that he's a former football coach and a well-respected one. He's made his entire reputation on the fact that he is moral and that he counsels troubled players like Michael Vick and others. Michael Vick probably most famously. But Stefan, this is a guy whose position on television and in public life is basically premised on the fact that he's a good person in a particular like Christian way, that he can counsel people and guide people and all of that stuff.
He's used his conservative Christianity as a cover for anti-gay statements and actions. Every time something like this happens, he talks about how it's just about following the Bible and being a good person. And he doesn't object.
I don't
to
know
anybody.
if he considers it if he uses it as a cover. Like I'm sure he sincerely believes all of these things. And it's not like he's saying, I hate gay people. Oh, wait, I better tell people I'm a Christian so they think that it's okay. I think that he has this belief system where he's a Christian, so he believes X, Y, and Z.
I think that's a distinction without a difference, honestly. I mean, this is a guy that has raised money and supported groups that actively oppose marriage equality. He spoke out against Jason Collins, the NBA player who came out, talking about his lifestyle. Most famously, when Michael Sam wanted to play in the NFL, he said he wouldn't want him on his team.
Even if he could play, by the way.
Even if he could play, because he claimed that this would be a big distraction. And, as other people have pointed out, if you're a head coach and you can't handle that kind of a distraction, what can you handle? You're not qualified to be a head coach. And it goes beyond that, too. His demeanor and his openness and his sincerity and his I'm just a good Christian man personality have covered, I think, for the kinds of things he's done. He's also spoken at events hosted by one of these anti-gay Christian evangelists, Andrew Womack, who has said some incredibly disgusting things about gay people and about others.
Well, who else spoke at that was James Brown, but the CBS host. And Joel, he's not getting the same kind of flack or attention that Tony Dungy is, because James Brown has not made these other comments, I don't think, or hasn't made the same kind of amount of extensive comments about Jason Collins, Michael Sam. He didn't invoke Damar Hamlin in the way that Dungy did. And so, I think we're all in agreement that we don't support what Tony Dungy is saying and what he believes. I think the more interesting and thorny question is whether he should be fired, like whether he should not be on television.
And Joel, this is where I think comes to the most recent thing that happened last week with him tweeting that right-wing nonsense about litter boxes. Because this isn't just, I'm a Christian and this is what I believe. This is actually dangerous. Transgender and non-binary youth are at high risk. These kinds of attacks are clearly spreading disinformation or misinformation. They're dangerous. And Tony Dungy has 1 million followers almost on Twitter. There are kids that are in danger here, and reading this kind of garbage and spreading this kind of garbage isn't just being a Christian. It's the opposite, obviously, but it also indicates that he is deep into the right-wing political craziness online.
It's tough for me to say whether or not he should be fired, because NBC, NFL, they have all this information. They've had it all for a long time, and they've supported him and, in fact, not said anything in response. So Tony Dungy is not acting any differently than I would have expected to under the circumstances. But I just want to take a quick second, because I moved to Tampa a couple of years after Tony Dungy's oldest son, James Dungy, died by suicide. He was 18 years old, a community college student, was a visible presence at and around the Bucs for years. And the reason I bring this up is because, in addition to how terrible of a tragedy it was, it reminds me that Tony Dungy has suffered quite a bit. And, I'm not trying to use this card. I'm a father now, and I couldn't imagine going through something like that. And like, seriously, when people said you can't imagine what this is like, now I'm like, oh, I understand how something like that might pierce your heart forever. And to that point, last year, the NPR reported on a study run by the Trevor Project, which is the world's largest suicide prevention and mental health organization for LGBT youth, and is partially supported by the NFL. Anyway, that study showed that about half of LGBTQ youth have considered suicide. Additionally, 1 in 5 transgender and non-binary youth have attempted suicide. And so, without being too dramatic or inflammatory, we know that people who are part of this particular marginalized group suffer an awful lot, and they're at risk for an awful lot. And that Tony Dungy, who has been through this, he's experienced this particular sort of pain, and either doesn't know or doesn't care that the rhetoric that he's passing along only worsens that phenomenon. It's especially galling. And I would hope that his Christianity would allow him to see the empathy for these kids and their parents, but evidently not.
Well, Josh, what's different about what happened last week is that Tony Dungy, in his apology, didn't say, I spread something that was false or I spread misinformation. he said, I saw a tweet yesterday and I responded to it in the wrong way. And then he talked about being a Christian and he needed to be more caring and helpful. And I failed to do that. And I am deeply sorry. As a matter of substance, this is different. And I think that's where you'd be looking for NBC and the NFL to say something, at least to him, and then publicly too.
The Tom Brenneman thing I want to bring up again because he used an anti-gay slur on a hot mic and he got fired instantly. And it's easy for corporations to fire someone, to find someone for saying the wrong word. And I think it's a lot more difficult, especially when it's bound up in religious belief. People tie themselves in knots about what should we do about someone who, Tony Dungy and what he said has been more harmful, I can say with confidence, than any effect that Tom Brenneman had on anyone. But Tony Dungy hasn't said the magic words that'll get you fired. So the thing that I think is cover for him, that I would use that word that you used, Stefan, is the fact that he has this reputation of being a moral leader that goes back to when he was a coach. And he was rightly celebrated for being in a league that has discriminated against Black coaches forever and continues to, that he transcended that and was a symbol of the fact that you should give Black coaches a chance. That guy was an amazing coach. I think he had maybe one losing season or something like that. So the fact that he was on NBC, he was like this symbol, right, of a guy who had, transcended that obstacle and succeeded and was like, look at this guy who was so great. We should have more people like him. And the fact that he is still on TV and still in the league is kind of a reminder of wait, this guy was amazing as a coach. Why aren't there more coaches who look like him? And so I think nobody has ever said that he's good on television. The big story about him before all of this came out was how bad he was during that wild card round game, that he just sounded completely bored. He's never said anything interesting. He's never says anything surprising or particularly novel. At best, he's inoffensive. But I don't think NBC is going to be eager to get this guy off of TV for everything that he's kind of stood for and represented. And the fact that if he does leave, the right-wing media that Tony Dungy is clearly so infatuated with would be absolutely thrilled if he got martyred for his beliefs. Or that's what they would claim is what happened. So, NBC and the NFL, but I think NBC for a really long time, has pursued this strategy of just never saying anything. It's not like they've commented and supported him. They've just said nothing at all. And that's what they're going to do. I think, I'm not sure if what he would have to do.
Their silence is consent, but
I just think that they're not going to say or do anything. I've been talking for a while, but the last thing I'll say is they got rid of Drew Brees after a year for the crime of being really bad on television. And he was allowed to walk away. I'm going to pursue other interests. And, for whatever reason, he decided after going into broadcasting, he wanted to pursue other interests after 1 year. Everybody knew what was going on there. And so they clearly are willing to get rid of a very famous and high profile person if they want to. And so that again is consent too, right, Joel?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They easily could move on and do something different, but they just choose not to. I mean, that's what I said. He's not Shannon Sharpe. He's not Charles Barkley, as I mentioned earlier. He's about as bad as Drew Brees. I would argue. I mean, again, we talked about this. When have we ever run a Tony Dungy clip on this show? He's had 13 years to get on here, and he's never made it for anything other than this. So presumably he's not on the road to saying anything interesting at any point. So I think maybe you're right, Josh, that they're holding on to him with the understanding that firing him is the best thing that they could do for him and the worst thing they could do in sort of drawing the wrath of those right-wing reactionaries.
It's cowardly, basically.
Absolutely.
I want to finish by...
The thing that's so interesting about it is that corporate America is deathly afraid of being considered, and rightly so, of being considered anti-LGBT or being considered racist or, all of these things. And so I think Dungy has this, he's not Kurt Schilling. He's not he's not
toxic
really
in any
ugly.
way.
He's not ugly about it. Yeah. He's got this, he still has the image of being an upstanding person.
He's not toxic in only the most superficial
Correct.
ways.
Exactly.
Right.
That's right.
And yet this is a league that, to bring up the most obvious comparison, as Dave Zirin does, I think, well in the nation, this is a league that blackballed Colin Kaepernick because he wanted to end police violence and racial inequity. And yet, I think what happened last week, though, is somehow substantively different. Zirin writes that what in the world is religious about bearing false witness against teachers and children with a lie that has had real-life repercussions? Every bomb threat leveled against children's hospitals, every physical assault bears the fingerprints of these lies. Dungy should feel shame. Instead, he is emboldened, ready to take stage at a rally that's been a blunt instrument for robbing people of their rights to privacy and the rights to their own bodies. The NFL and NBC are choosing to be implicated in Dungy's beliefs. Their silence does speak to their complicity. Up next, we'll talk to Isaac Butler about the Australian Open and the new documentary Breakpoint.
It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Apple Card is designed to help you pay less interest. Unlike other cards, it estimates how much interest you'll owe and suggests moves to help you pay off your balance faster. Also, you can keep more of your money. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval, interest estimates on the payment wheel are illustrative only and may not fully reflect actual interest charges on your account. Estimates are based on your posted account balance at the time of the estimate and do not include pending transactions or any other purchases you may make before the end of the billing period. Going into the quarterfinals of the Australian Open, it's looking like the only thing that can stop the still unvaccinated but this time non-deported Novak Djokovic from winning his record-tying 22nd Grand Slam is maybe a bulky hamstring. But there are 3 Americans left in the draw who are going to give it a shot, and they're all 25 or younger. They are Tommy Paul and Ben Shelton, who will play each other in the quarters, so one of them will at least be in the semis, and Sebastian Korda, the son of former Aussie Open champ Peter Korda. Joining us now is Isaac Butler. He is the co-host of Slate's excellent Working podcast. He also occasionally writes about tennis for Slate, and he's the author of The Method, How the 20th Century Learned to Act, which was on Best Books of the Year lists from Vanity Fair, Vox, and Powell's, among other places. Isaac, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, it is such a pleasure to be geeking out about tennis with you guys.
And with you as well. And my intro actually understated how large a role American men have played at this year's first Grand Slam. And that's even with Frances Tiafoe and Taylor Fritz having disappointing slams by their standards. The top 2 seeds, Rafael Nadal and Casper Ruud, were beaten by a pair of unseeded Americans, Mackie McDonald and Jensen Brooksby. But the 2 I think we're going to focus on in this segment are Sebi Korda and Ben Shelton. Who do you want to start with?
Why don't we talk about Ben Shelton, since I think he's the surprise story, of this slam, really.
As loyal listeners of this podcast, including Stefan Fatsis, will know, Ben Shelton is 20-year-old NCAA champ, lefty, big serve. And when I did my Afterball about him last fall, Isaac, I don't think I knew that he had never left the country.
I know, it's that wild.
That is the kind of fact that helps explain how wild it is that this guy is in the quarterfinals of the Aussie Open. This is his first trip out of the country for any reason. What have you seen out of him at this tournament, Isaac?
Yeah, I mean, it's really fascinating how meteoric his rise has been. I mean, he was ranked well outside the top 100 not that long ago. He's currently ranked 89. He'll crack the top 50 by the end of the tournament, no matter what happens in the quarterfinals. He's a really fun player to watch. He's a lefty, which is always fun to, those lefty-righty matchups are always really entertaining. He plays with really good variety. He has an amazing serve. It averages about 126 miles per hour. He can put big kick on it on either first or second serve, so it's bouncing high up, which makes it much harder to return. But also for, old school tennis fans like myself, he really loves being at the net. He loves rushing the net. He loves finishing the point at the net. He's not like so tall like Isner that's the only thing he can do, I think that what his recent 5-set win demonstrated is that consistency is going to be his real challenge. If your serve is never broken, you probably shouldn't be playing 5 sets of tennis, right? You should probably be closing that one out in 3. I mean, he hit 23 aces, there's just a couple moments where he let the match get away from him a little bit. But the good news is he stayed on top of his emotions. 5-set matches, that 5th set is really much more about mental and physical fitness than it is about anything else. And we really saw that as Wolf's body started to break down during the 5th set. He's only 20. I think he's got nothing but upside, clearly. And I think the future is really bright for him.
How much of this is an argument for waiting to turn pro? I mean, Ben Shelton was playing in the NCAAs last spring. He won the NCAA singles championship. He was a sophomore at Florida, where his dad, a former player, is the head coach. He was ranked 547th in the world at the time. And he made the decision to turn pro at what seems like the peak moment. I mean, he has coaches, he has people around him. He has got a family of athletes around him who sort of seem to know how to manage this transition really well and have him in a position to challenge immediately.
Yeah, I think that Noah Rubin, who we've had on the show before, had it right when he said that what Shelton demonstrates is that there isn't a perfect formula for creating a successful tennis player. They just all include working your ass off and a bit of talent. So I think what he's showing is that the pathway he chose is a possible successful pathway, not that it's the best or only one. And, Isaac, one thing that's so notable about him, it's not just how young he is, but he kind of seems young in his exuberance. Yeah. He's just so happy and excited kind of all the time on the court. Just the constant kind of guttural screams and come-ons, which don't seem to be annoying the other players yet. Maybe they will like in a few months. But
I mean, Brooksby is the young American that seems to piss everybody off, right? Like it seems like the other players find him very annoying. But Ben Shelton is a real boyish charm. I think Tiafoe has held on to that charm, even as he's, older now and more seasoned and the expectations for him have risen. As I wrote for Slate last year, that's part of what's so much fun about watching Alcaraz, as he just seems to like have a pure love of the sport and of competing. Alcaraz, of course, did not go to the NCAA, but each player, you got to pick the right moment. And I do think that, the NCAA has done a pretty good job of creating men's professional tennis players that are going to be in the top 50 or top 20 or occasionally top 10. Stevie Johnson, John Isner, Cam Norrie, who's an ascendant Brit player, actually played for the NCAA, Mackenzie McDonald, who took out Nadal, JJ Wolf, Ben Shelton. I mean, they're doing pretty well, as much as there is not one formula for the creation of a tennis player in a lab.
And this has to be a total shock. And this is one of the delightful things about Shelton's performance. It's just the way it impacts other players who probably didn't know anything about this guy. I mean, after he beat the Aussie Alexei Popyrin, Popyrin said at the news conference, honestly, if this is the way he plays day in, day out, this guy is top 10 in 6 months. And Shelton later kind of demurred in his own news conference, which was, I watched the whole thing, and that was lovely. He's just delightful.
And the thing that I think is so fascinating about him is, you alluded to it, Isaac, and there was also, I think, a couple notes about this on the broadcast, is that he clearly has so many things that he needs to work on to improve. He gets jammed on his backhand. His court position is bad. And yet, the thing that he'll be able to carry with him through his whole career, and I'm not comparing him to Nadal. I think they're extremely different players, but the game is just so simple for him with the serve, and basically his normal game, if he's playing reasonably well, is good enough. He doesn't need to do anything like a lot of guys who are around, 50 or who aren't, the big three traditionally. He doesn't have to do anything crazy, like just aim for lines. Like, he gets so much spin, his ball is so heavy, his serve is so big that his normal game just seems like it'll do really well on tour. And let's transition to Sebi Korda, Isaac, because he's a guy who, when he's playing his best, as we've seen against, Djokovic, Nadal, he can almost look unbeatable at times as like a 22-year-old. And yet he's had, for his young career, these kind of like devastating come from ahead losses where he was up 2 breaks on Nadal at Indian Wells in the final set and lost. He had a match point on Djokovic, who looks unbeatable, except Sebi Korda almost beat him in a warm-up tournament. But so far, at least in this Aussie Open, he has had those ups and downs, but he's managed to come through these matches.
Yeah, he's had a couple of real heartbreaking losses. I think the way the sports commentators always say is, he's knocking on that door, which means he's very close to getting to the point where he can really consistently beat the top guys. But some players never walk through it. Some players, those losses really devastate them. They get in their head. They even derail their career. I remember the one time I went to the French Open in person was to watch a 5-setter between Djokovic and Jo-Wilfried Tsonga. And Tsonga was leading for almost that entire match and lost it. And I don't think he ever played as well as he played in that match again. I mean, I think it like really fucked him up.
Well, Medvedev against Nadal losing after being up,
perfect example, yeah.
After being up 2 sets in the final has looked completely lost in the year since.
Tsitsipas versus in the French Open, Tsitsipas has really never recovered from how well he played a couple years ago in those near losses in Grand Slams. But Korda seems to be making it work, or seems to be trying to figure it out. Maybe in part because his hair is so magnificent. I'm not entirely sure. He's steady mentally. He comes from a family of athletes who knows what it is to compete at the high level. And, Medvedev said what makes Korda so hard to play in his post-match press conference. He hits the ball hard, which a lot of people do. He hits it on the rise, which a lot of people do. But he also hits it with a ton of accuracy. And for a big guy, he moves surprisingly well. And the player who Medvedev actually compared him to, he said the only one who plays like Korda is Novak Djokovic.
Well, Stefan, Korda, I think, plays the least like a stereotypical American of any of these guys. He's not a big serve, big forehand type of player. He has this kind of all-court game that looks like the game that all-time greats have. He looks beautiful on the court. He has, elegant shots from everywhere. He's versatile. And yeah, I guess the game looks kind of easy for him, but in a different way than Ben Shelton. Like, he's not going to just completely blow guys off the court. But when he's playing his best, you're like, this guy doesn't seem to miss. And I don't know what there is that you can do about that.
Maybe that's part of his upbringing too. His dad was not American, right? Peter Korda is Czech, and was as high as number 2 in the world at one point in his career. The thing about Korda and all of these players really, and I think at some point we're going to transition to talking about breakpoint, is the importance of what you alluded to earlier, Isaac, is the mental aspect of this, the idea that what the athletes work on in addition to spin and serve and placement and returns and volleying is the idea of getting rid of the bad thoughts that derail careers or at least matches. And Korda talked about that after one of these matches at the Aussie Open. that I worked really hard on just zero negative thoughts, and I wish I could go through life with zero negative thoughts.
Let's talk about Breakpoint, the new Netflix series that Isaac reviewed for Slate. Here's a clip.
I lost that match from being match point up. I just didn't know how to handle that situation. Couldn't sleep for 3 days. I was just lying in bed and trying to sleep, but I was so nervous and so sad. It was tough for me to handle. And I told my coaches that I want to retire from tennis. And I retired for 4 days. And then I was in a Greek island, and I just called Tom and I said, okay, when can we start practicing again? Coming back from retirement. That's how we've been calling it.
That was the Greek player, Maria Sakkari. And Isaac, she wasn't the only player to instantaneously announce that she was going to retire after a loss, as depicted in the series. And I thought that was the strongest part of the series, just showing in this visceral way how devastating it is for these players on really a week-to-week basis to choose this life and be on the tour.
Yeah, I mean, it's a grueling life. You know, one of the creators of the show said that, you know, once they started following these people around, they're like, why would anyone choose this life? It just seems so grueling. You're on the road 10 to 11 months a year. That's how long the season is. If you look at it in terms of tournaments, you're losing far more than you win. You're making good money, but you're spending an enormous percentage of it on your team, as they talk about in the episode that focuses on Ons Jabeur. It's often called the loneliest sport because you're just out there on the court going toe-to-toe with your opponent, and all you really have to rely on is yourself, or maybe your box, because you might be screaming insults at them at the time. It's really hard. And of course, you know, the press, folks like us, you know, we're also, you know, digging into everything about these players with a fine-tooth comb.
It's what, in the first episode, what Nick Kyrgios says, tennis is an extremely lonely sport. It's what I struggle with the most. And he has talked about that as a reason for why he doesn't play more and why he doesn't expect to play into his mid or late 30s. I mean, what I've liked about the episodes that I've watched is that it does depict the sort of mundanity of tennis. And I think any time we get these inside looks at sports, you have a choice. You're either going to sort of glamorize it and play up the exciting moments and the matches and the tense points and the victories and defeats, or you can actually depict sports for what they are for athletes, which are this utterly exhausting, repetitive, day-to-day grind. The physios, the massages,
the ice baths,
the sort of shitty side courts. I love the scenes where you see these guys walking down cinder block corridors or watching another player in episode 1, the Kyrgios episode. You see other players in the locker room watching Kyrgios melt down on the court. That's the stuff that I'm looking for in these docs, and less the sort of the winning and losing part. And the things that I think that Breakpoint has done well is let us glimpse, at least. Maybe the brush is a little too broad and we don't get enough detail, but at least we are getting some insight into the sort of the quotidian elements of sport and the mental fatigue and challenges that the players face.
Your review, Isaac, was not really a positive one, though. No. What were your critiques of the show?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Stefan that all of that stuff is really good. That every time that, you know, one of the players is talking about their lives, or especially when we're interviewing their teams, I loved the parts about Ons Jabeur and her insistence on having, you know, a Tunisian team, and her husband is her physio. Like, all that stuff was great. But I feel like the show behaves as if the sport itself and the playing of the sport is uninteresting, incomprehensible garbage. Like, they do not actually care about or respect the sport enough, when actually all of that mundane stuff and all of those personal struggles, the way they find expression, this is what's so great about an individual sport, is all that stuff finds its expression in the actual playing of the sport. And they never show enough of that or discuss what the players are thinking and feeling during the match for the emotional payoffs that they're trying so hard to build with those fake newscasters and everything like that to really land. To me, one of the best moments is when Taylor Fritz is in voiceover discussing what the serve is going to be on match point from his Indian Wells championship win over Nadal. And you actually hear him describe the tactics. You're like, there you go. That is the payoff for everything we've been following Fritz doing over the course of this tournament. And there just isn't enough of it. You won't come away from it with any deeper knowledge of the sport itself that will enable you to watch it and enjoy it more, frankly, unless you're talking about one of these few individual players that they have covered. And, you know, at a time when ESPN is doing such a terrible job of covering the sport, and especially this slam that we happen to be in the middle of, you know, I would like to be able to share with people a little bit more, like, this is what actually makes this sport great and fun to watch.
Josh, I wonder if that's because this is by the creators of Drive to Survive about Formula One. And Formula One is a sport that not a lot of fans, particularly American fans, know as well as tennis. And maybe there's an attempt to sort of apply the same formula to tennis, where we know a lot about the sport itself and want that sort of technical insight that is so valuable and would come off as new.
Yeah, so I agree with like maybe 75% of what you guys said. I think that there is clearly, from the producers of Drive to Survive, who made this show as well, they seem to believe that the stuff that you want, Isaac, is not what the vast majority of people watching or potentially watching this want. And they might be right. They're professional. They're good at making television shows like this. The question is it good for tennis and its kind of long-term health and viability as a sport that builds and grows fan interest for this show to be like this, as opposed to trying to get people deeper into the nuances of the sport? I mean, I know from people, I do not watch Drive to Survive. I've made the life choice that I watch most of the sports. I do not watch auto racing, but
you gotta choose, right? At some point, you gotta do triage.
You have to choose. But I know from people who watch that show that it's a gateway, that they then go and learn about the teams and about the sport on their own, that they don't necessarily expect that show to do anything beyond what it does. And so maybe it'll be the same here, or maybe it'll be less successful and people won't get deeper or won't care. I think we'll have to see. But I mean, for me, I actually liked it more than I was expecting to, because I read a lot of reviews from folks like you, Isaac, and other kind of knowledgeable tennis people who said that it was disappointing. Right. But there was this moment that you wrote about, and I was like tickled that you chose it, of Casper Ruud putting on his headband before the match against Nadal.
It's hypnotic.
It's hypnotic, but also there's this moment, and they have this amazing access where before the French Open final, you see Nadal doing his warm-up behind, you know, outside the locker room as they're about to walk on the court, and he's running around and jumping, and Ruud looks absolutely like terrified. And for me, yes. I loved seeing that. I loved getting that access. And yeah, I would have liked to have heard more of the Fritz analysis that you're talking about, but that's just not what the show is going to give us, clearly. And so I did kind of, by the end, appreciate it for what it was.
I think the question becomes for me, like, do these characters evolve? Right. There are going to be there were 5 episodes released now and 5 more to come. And the first 5 episodes really cast a wide net. And I think for an audience, that can be difficult. I mean, it's a lot of characters to keep track of, especially if you're not a deep in the woods tennis fan the way you two guys are, and I am to a slightly lesser extent. So I think the transition here to the next 5, I think will say a lot about both the filmmaking, but also about whether this is something that is going to translate into sort of a general audience appeal. And I think that the sort of the skimming the surface of these athletes works for the 40 minutes of each episode, but you really don't get the full, deeper picture, because we want to see what happens to Taylor Fritz, and I want to see what happens to some of the other players going forward through this season.
Yeah, I think that, like, maybe it's that they have too many people they're following or whatever. You know, like, I'm not expecting the whole show to be like a breakdown point by point of a match or whatever. I'm literally talking about like 5 to 8 minutes of an episode dedicated to actual match play instead of slow motion shots of their form. Like, we know their form is great, you know? That's really all I'm saying, is like, cut some of the stuff that to me just feels like kind of like BS TV stuff. And you have an opportunity to do something really unique and compelling, I think, and beautiful.
We will link to Isaac's review on our show page. You can also listen to him on the Working podcast, and you should check out his book, The Method. Isaac, thank you for coming on.
It was a pleasure. Or in the voice of one of their fake newscasters,
Isaac Butler was just a guest on Hang Up and Listen. But can he do his own podcast?
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, when you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right now from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $698 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
And now it is time for Afterballs, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says it was okay. Gwen Knapp died last week at just 61 of lymphoma. As an undergrad at Harvard, she covered the greatest football game I've ever attended, Penn's last-second win over Harvard on a second field goal attempt. She claimed Penn's kicker was roughed. She was wrong. That was rare. Gwen spent a decade on the sports staff of the Philadelphia Inquirer and then 17 years as a columnist for the San Francisco Examiner and the Chronicle, where she actually reported her columns and then applied her unwaveringly moral and upright voice. Before Balco, Gwen raised eyebrows about Barry Bonds' unlikely feats. She called out Reggie White for anti-gay bigotry. She doubted Lance Armstrong years before he admitted to being a cheat, so much that the cyclist wrote a letter to the editor to complain. When Armstrong finally confessed, Gwen wrote that his 7 Tour de France yellow jerseys, quote, might as well go to the most shamefully forgotten people in this scandal. The jerseys can be draped, one apiece, over the graves of 7 European cyclists who died young and mysteriously in 2003 and 2004. We met a long time ago at an Olympics or a Super Bowl or through a mutual friend. I can't remember. She appeared on this show once during the 2014 Winter Games when she was writing for the late website Sports on Earth. She moved to the New York Times as an editor that year on the foreign desk, then national, and back to sports. On social media and in print over the weekend, Gwen's colleagues eulogized her talent and her friendship. Mark Fainaru-Wada wrote on Facebook that when she stopped writing columns, it wasn't simply journalism's loss. It was a loss for every reader who wanted to understand more than what they saw on the field and really in the world. Her column writing partner at the Chronicle, Ray Ratto, tweeted that Gwen was an underappreciated giant in the journalism gig, and that was the least of her attributes. He expanded in a post in Defector. She came slightly too late to be part of the original vanguard of women's sports journalists, Ratto wrote, but she was a grand example of the transition to the industry-wide acceptance and admiration for women who could bring the goods. Ratto praised Gwen's gifts of thoroughness, observation, passion, nuance, instinct, and reverence through application of the written word. And he concluded she had all the game a journalist can have without the behaviors that turn some journalists into brands. And in that way, she can still serve as an inspiration for those who came after her now and for years to come. We'll post a link on the show page to Ratto's remembrance and to Kevin Draper's obituary in the New York Times. Rest in peace, Gwen. Josh, what's your Gwen nap?
Not sure if there's anything I can add to this CBS Sports headline about what happened in LA on Friday night. It reads, Shannon Sharpe, Ja Morant's dad, separated in heated exchange at Lakers-Grizzlies halftime. Later, hug it out. A complete story in one sentence. Actually, I will expand by letting Shannon Sharpe, the Pro Football Hall of Famer and co-host of Skippin' Shannon Undisputed, take it from here. They didn't want this smoke, Sharpe told ESPN's Dave McMenamin at halftime. They do all that talking and jockeying, and I ain't about that jockeying. It started with Dylan Brooks. I said he was too small to guard LeBron. He said, fuck me. I said, fuck you back. He started to come at me and I said, you don't want these problems. And then Ja came out of nowhere talking. He definitely didn't want these problems. Then the dad came and he obviously didn't want no problems, but I wanted anything they had. Don't let these fools fool you now. So that was the last thing that changed. Oh, actually, hold on. Monday morning, we have an update.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm not perfect. I am not. And I'm never going to say that wasn't Shannon Sharpe because that was me. That was just me getting out of character. And I'm sorry for all those that saw my action and took offense to my actions. I am sorry.
I am sorry, too, for failing to mention earlier that he was wearing a truly remarkable cardigan on Friday while all of this was going down. If you haven't seen it, please do yourself a favor and look it up. But we're only mostly here to talk about Shannon Sharpe's cardigan because there's another NBA fight that I want to reminisce about today. Vernon Maxwell versus a guy in Portland. Vernon Maxwell, as Joel knows very well, won a pair of NBA titles as a guard with the
Houston Rockets, of course.
And he played in the league from 1988 to 2001. He was known as Mad Max, and befitting that nickname, there is an entire section of his Wikipedia page headlined, quote, behavioral incidents. The top bullet point on that list, and I quote, in a game at Portland on February 6, 1995, he ran into the stands punching a fan due to the fan heckling him. The NBA suspended him for 10 games and fined him $20,000. This incident was a pretty big deal at the time, as you can imagine, but has been a little bit memory hold, forgotten, given that the Malice at the Palace happened in 2004 and has taken its place in the cultural imagination as the incident where a basketball dude went in the stands and punches were thrown. Plus, the Mad Max thing does not have a nickname, as far as I can tell, so maybe one thing that we can accomplish on this week's podcast is coming up with one. The two that I thought of, and you guys can ponder while I finish the Afterball, Mad Max and the PDX and Mad Max Fury 10th Row. But anyway.
Tough. Okay. The right hand in Portland, something like that.
There was a resurgence of attention on this in May 2020 when a clip of the incident resurfaced on social media. And I have to warn you that this clip is incredibly strange. Let's listen to the first 15 to 20 seconds.
Now on NBA Inside Stuff.
Yeah, kiss my ass, motherfucker.
It was a great game. It was a good win. And I think we're on the right track now.
Moving some goddamn well. Shit, kiss my ass too. Motherfucker, you don't know me.
What you just heard in order is an audio bumper for the television show NBA Inside Stuff, Vernon Maxwell cursing someone out, an interview with Jerry Seinfeld, and then more of Vernon Maxwell cursing someone out. What you don't see, what you need the video for, is a shot of Bill Gates in the stands. And then very clearly, you see Vernon Maxwell kind of loping up a set of stairs, punching a dude in the face, and then getting held back by his Rockets teammate,
Robert Horry.
Thank you. I have not been able to discern why Jerry Seinfeld was at this game. He was wearing a Blazers hat, incidentally, or why the show NBA Inside Stuff, which, Joel, you remember, was marketed to children,
I did not know that they did this sort of.
Why would it feature unexpurgated footage of Vernon Maxwell cursing? Perhaps they didn't, and somebody just put that bumper on the clip just for shits and giggles. I don't know. What I do know is that, yes, Vernon Maxwell was suspended for 10 games, and he claimed that he hit the guy because, among other things, he'd been heckling him about his wife's miscarriage. The fan, who was named Steve George, denied that claim quite vociferously and filed a $4.5 million lawsuit against Maxwell and against the Rockets. Maxwell then sued the fan and his brother, claiming they slandered him by accusing him of a crime. A year later, they agreed to an out-of-court settlement, with Maxwell reportedly paying in the low to mid 5 figures. Joel, Vernon Maxwell is a presence in our lives still, in social media, in the podcasting world. He has not expressed regret for his role in this incident. What do you remember about all of this? You clearly remember Robert Horry was holding him back.
Yeah, I recalled all that without the benefit of watching the clip, because it's that seared in my memory. If anything, it just now in retrospect, it seems like that should have been so much a bigger deal. I mean, 10 games. He had a 10-game suspension for running into the stands and punching a fan. And the funny thing is, not Robert Horry pulls him back onto the bench, and the game continues. I mean, that just shows you, like, we just have, I guess, a different sensibility in the 90s, or maybe the absence of cameras in quite the way.
There was a lot of fighting on the court in the 80s and 90s, as you'll recall.
Yeah, but man, I can't.
There's nothing in all of, not just sports, but in like American life that's more kind of, clucked about or problematized, or whatever dumb word you want to use, than like a player punching a fan. And so Joel is totally right. This like, it's shocking now. And I think I chalk this up to East Coast bias. And especially like anything that happens in the West Coast that's not in California. Yeah. Like Portland fans should really be upset that this is more about nobody paying attention to anything that happens in a Portland Trailblazers game.
Yeah, no, Josh, so absolutely. So just think about it. This game probably happened, especially this is the early 90s. So that probably happened at what, like 1 a.m. Eastern? You know what I mean? So nobody, like, even by the time people woke up the next morning, you would have had to have searched really hard to get information about that thing, and there was no video of it.
On the other hand, Jerry Seinfeld and Bill Gates were at the game. 2 pretty iconic figures from the 90s.
I think we're going to need to do a follow-up Afterball, kind of trying to explain some of the stranger things in associated with this game. But Joel, we also just need to get your take on the Shannon Sharpe thing quickly before we sign off.
Well, as you all know, I'm a regular listener of Skip and Shannon, and I listen to it while I clean the dishes every night.
So Shannon was apologizing to you.
Yeah, right. I mean, look, man, Shannon, you've got nothing to apologize for. I wouldn't have expected anything else. Like, this is, look, and also I'll just, the Grizzlies are just a little mouthy, even though Desmond Bain, former TCU great, fringe all-star, they're just a little mouthy. Now, although Shannon should not be talking shit to players on the court, I'm glad that he was there, and I'm glad he did it, just because it's just totally in keeping with my idea. They are just extremely entertaining. And look, no harm, no foul, right? Nobody got hurt. Steven Adams didn't throw a punch. T. Morant stayed clear. They reconciled later. No harm, no foul, right?
Shannon Sharpe's a 54-year-old man.
Yeah, but he don't look like no 54. He don't look like most 54-year-old man.
He does not. But I'm still going with Dylan Brooks in that matchup.
Joel, would you just do me a favor and tweet at Vernon Maxwell and ask him how he would have responded to Shannon Sharpe coming up to him like that? I think that's content that the internet needs.
I was actually going to ask you all, should we just go ahead and go to his Cameo account and just pay for him to come on and talk about it next week?
I don't know. I think maybe he would just come on out of the kindness of his heart.
He's got a podcast to promote.
That's true. Well, we can talk about it.
That is our show for today. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. Listen to past shows and subscribe or just reach out. Go to slate.com/hangup. You can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. For Joel Anderson and Stefan Fatsis, I'm Josh Levin. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Heidecker. You know me, Tim and Eric, Bridesmaids, and Fantastic Four. I'd like to personally invite you to listen to Office Hours Live with me and my co-hosts, DJ Doug Pound.
Hello.
And Vic Berger.
Howdy.
Every week we bring you laughs, fun, games, and lots of other surprises. It's live. We take your Zoom calls.
Music.
We love having fun. Excuse me?
Songs. Vic said something. Music.
Songs.
Music.
I like having fun. I like to laugh. I like to meet people who can make me laugh. Please subscribe now.